So this is Epiphany Sunday, and the word Epiphany means new revelation, and traditionally in the church calendar, this day falls, I think, on January 6th. Wow, that's interesting. January, the correlation now of that date for us is very different, but usually we celebrate that day on a Sunday, and so today is Epiphany Sunday, and we read usually the gospel lesson that was for us of Matthew. But we read this Matthew text each time we celebrate Epiphany. And one of the things about Matthew is if you read Matthew chapter 1, there's this long lineage that Matthew tries to connect Jesus to this Davidic lineage. And if you read this, if you don't skip past this and you kind of read through it, you begin to realize that there are some interesting characters within this genealogy and that are really essential to the Davidic line. One of the people is Rahab. Rahab was a prostitute in Jericho. And so here's this person who is not a Jewish person, who's actually a foreign person, who becomes an essential part of the this Davidic line to Jesus. And then the next person in this Davidic line who is a Moabite woman, who is not an Israelite woman, is Ruth. And so you have these two people that are not a part of this Jewish lineage, that are a part of this Jesus story. And you kind of see Matthew, the gospel writers. There was a big debate in first century Christianity, like how Jewish are we? And it became the tension, and I think the winning debate became, we're Jewish, but this whole thing has expanded past us, outside of us, and welcoming others. And so we take this season in this day of Epiphany, and the word Epiphany means new revelation, and we tell this story of these non-Jewish people who are religious, who probably had other gods, other practices, and yet something drew them, a revelation drew them to come to Mary's house to celebrate this baby. And it's exciting. We got 2 babies here today, which is exciting, and we celebrate that. I specifically want to talk about how we in our lives think about our faith journey and how we interact with ways and people and ideas that are different than us. I think how odd it must have felt to Mary to have these, foreigners, non-Jewish people who came to celebrate this Christ child. If you think about your faith journey, for all of us, I realize most of us probably come into this space. We have a faith journey. I'm going to cough. It's not as controversial as it was like last year. It's like, oh, he coughed. Did he test? But we all have a faith journey. Most of us have had interaction with evangelical. We have some type of evangelical Protestant history in our lives, and in some of those circles, if not all of them, there is a thought process of this is our belief system, and it's like these are the strict. This is what we believe. A, B, and C, you say yes to these things, don't question it, don't ask, like the thing about Scripture is, like, in a lot of circles, Scripture doesn't contradict itself. Has anybody ever heard that or, like, taught, Scripture doesn't do those things, and now you might be sitting here in this space going and thinking, like, I think so differently from what I was taught or how I was raised. Because what you might realize in your faith is that you've evolved and that you've had people, places, ideas, books that Gaddy is waiting to read that have come into your life that have molded and shaped you and changed you and have influenced the way you believe about your faith now. And we can all kind of like maybe make those markers and those transitions in our lives. So we are some people will come in here and go, like, oh, I'm so glad I found a non-denominational church. And I'm usually like, oh, yeah, welcome. We're United Methodists, but if it keeps you here to believe we're non-denominational, okay, we are non-denominational church. But that does not pay my mortgage. But we are a United Methodist church, and we have a Wesleyan background. And one of the things that I love about John Wesley and why I feel drawn to a Wesleyan type faith is I've always kind of felt that Wesley's bent, even though I think if I was to hang out with this John Wesley, I think he would be somebody that would annoy me and somebody I would really not like. And I don't think he would be a personable person. But all that to be said, he was always someone who I thought always had his ear to the outside. Could the way my faith is constructed in my life be influenced by how somebody else experiences their faith? Wesley made one journey over the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. He made one journey over, and he made the journey with a people called Moravians. And the Moravians were German people, and Wesley would describe their faith as primitive. I've only ridden on a cruise ship a few miles away from the beach. I've never crossed the Atlantic, and I imagine that these boats were not anything like they weren't ideal conditions to cross, and they had no like weather mapping or satellites, and so when they were crossing, like, you know, this deeply faithful man began to fear for his life and his faith, and he was witnessing these German Moravians, like, who had this very primitive, simplistic faith. Weren't scared, weren't anxious, weren't fearful, and I would be Wesley. I'd be like, we're gonna die, like we're all gonna die. You're gonna die. You're gonna like Oprah, except not a car, but we're all gonna die. And I'm just like taking all the things that I hear today and like incorporating them.
Coming here to the outside.
That's right. But Wesley was deeply influenced. Like, I want some of that. Like, I want some of that faith or whatever you have. And that deeply influenced who he was. And I think so often faith traditions were so scared of how other traditions, how other people live and exist, and we're so constructed like we don't do this, or we don't read this. But our faith tradition is really one that has really paid attention to how other traditions, how other ideas impact our way of experiencing the world. And part of that, I think that trajectory for our faith is one of the things for Wesley. Like, if you were to go to church in the 18th century, like, the only people that were allowed to like maintain this space were like ordained clergy. And so for Wesley, I keep coughing. There's a bottle of water in there. If I can. I know where every little nook and cranny thing is. Yes, thank you. I feel like y'all are staring at me, and I know it. But there was lay preachers, and like Wesley was really against lay preachers because he had taught in his faith tradition. But he went to see people preach that weren't ordained, and he's like, wow, that whatever that person is saying is good and makes sense to me. And Wesley leaned into that in the way he was constructing this this new movement of Methodist people. I contrast to the church that I've often experienced, and I was thinking last night, it's even more constrictive when you're like a staff person on a church, because like you're paid money, and so it's like you believe or think or you read something that is alternative to what they believe and think. Like it's not just, as a person you can just be like, I'm trying not to say cuss word, but like, I don't care. Like, I'm going to still come. I'll sit in the seat. Like, you can't, like, I can't fire you. But if you're like a paid staff, it's like, it's how you pay for your rent. Like, and they don't like what you're saying, like, they can fire you. Like, I'll just get rid of you. So I had started going to seminary. This is back when I was 21 or 20 years old. But I started going to seminary. And I started taking these like New Testament, Old Testament classes, and they started to say things, and maybe you've heard something along this line, like, the Old Testament and New Testament weren't written by like the actual authors, and so like Paul didn't write everything, and I'm like, what? Come again? Like Paul didn't write everything, or like Isaiah, like there were pseudo writers, like Moses didn't write the first five books of the Bible, the Pentateuch. Virtually impossible because it spanned years upon years. They were teaching me all these things, and so I like have this knowledge, and I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? Like, I got a small group. I'm going to tell my small group the knowledge that I am learning, like, and it's at the executive pastor's house. And so like I'm like, guys, Peter didn't write Peter, and you know what? And I still believe in Jesus. Like it's like. My faith was evolving. Like, I'm learning these things that are new, and I still like Jesus. And I was so excited and passionate about it. And the next day I come in to work, and the executive pastor like, hey, come on in. And we sit down in his office. He said, for our purposes here, Peter wrote Peter. And that was it. Like, I got what we teach people here, Matthew wrote Matthew, Luke wrote Luke, and walked out of the room. And I felt kind of like the air just out of my sail. Like, this, even though I thought I was like in this maybe progressive, evolving community, I felt I was entering into this, like, I was kind of lost. Like, I love Jesus, but I don't understand why the church really is so stuck and stringent on these, like, the Bible doesn't contradict itself, or like, historically we know that this Peter didn't write this, but we're going to tell people that Peter wrote this, and that my faith was evolving. And I fast forward to a few years down the road. I was reading Bart Ehrman. I don't know if he's a UNC Chapel Hill professor, but has written a lot of historical books on the Bible. And I remember a friend coming into my office, and like, he's a parishioner. I'm the pastor, and he sees this Bart Ehrman book on the wall, which is kind of like the book that really influenced me, like who wrote the Bible and whatnot. And he said, I want to read that. And I'm like, oh, he was really interested. I'm like, I think that book might ruin you, because it kind of ruined me. But I was, no, like, read it. Tell me what you think. And the amazing thing happened is that he came back, he's like, that was really good. And we went on with our life. His spiritual life went on, and the church that I kind of came out of, and I think so many other traditions that we might come out of, is really scared of us having new revelations or new thoughts or new ideas, because they're afraid that we'll lose our faith. But I think if we draw into this story before us, is what makes this story rich is that it's not people who are accustomed to the traditions. It's not people that are a part of the tradition. It's not people that we even recognize. It's people from outside the fold. And it makes our story more rich. As I reflect on this story, the villain in this story is Herod. And he kind of lurks in the back of the story, this one that is opposed to changes, and opposed to challenging of authority. And I think the church has become more like Herod in the name of orthodoxy, which means right faith, instead of the kind of church that provides space for foreign wise men and shepherds on their journey.